Do you want to know a secret? A secret that is so mysterious that it seems just far-fetched? I assure you, if you stick around to the end of this video, you will learn a little something about narcissism that no one, guaranteed, no one is talking about. This secret is shrouded in mystery that the Bible can expose. We just gotta get a little bit creative with a little bit of creative thought and biblical license here. But I assure you, we're not gonna change the Bible to our own liking. So sit back, relax, as I share with you the biblical mystery of narcissism and its hidden secrets. Narcissism, as we know, comes from Greek mythology. The mythological story tells a tale of a young man who is so popular and loved by everyone across the land. He is adored by men, women, and children. He shuns everyone's accolades as he relies on his own self-image instead, allowing his piety and selfish nature to rebuff anyone's advances. Rejecting the love of a woman, a Greek goddess finally has had enough of the selfish, egotistical prowess of this man. He is given a taste of his own medicine. He thinks he's all that and a bag of chips. Too good for everyone else? Then fine. He would just see how far loving himself to the extreme and in excess would take him. The story continues as the young hunter walks by a pool of water. Thirsty after the day's hunt, he bends down to cup the water in his hands. As he reaches into the calming pond, he notices his own reflection, and immediately he falls in love. The young man is mesmerized and refuses to leave the company of his own reflection. He cannot leave. His daily activities suffer. He no longer hunts to eat. He over time begins to waste away. He is so mesmerized, he loses the will to live, realizing that the love he feels for himself can, of course, never be returned by his own reflection. Conflicted in his heart and mind, the young man does what he thinks can only be done. He ends his misery, his sorrow, his longing, by taking his own life, thus ending the shallow love affair. In memory of this man's ill-gotten fate in life and in death, a flower every year would spring up at the place of his death to commemorate the hollowness and fleeting nature shrouded in outward beauty, the exhilarating and depth-defying shallowness of superficial love. This flower, the object of floral perfection, the narcissus, grows in honor of this myth. This is a good story, and it gives us insight into the behavioral disorder known as narcissism. But is this all we have to go on? Is there anything mentioned about narcissism outside of the Greek mythology? Yeah, as it turns out, the Bible gives us hidden detail into narcissism without calling it narcissism. There was one rule, one teeny tiny rule for everyone to obey. Rules didn't normally exist in heaven. That was until Adam and Eve showed up. This transgression was disapproving of God. He had no choice but to oust everyone who was involved with this treachery, this treason. The outcome, if the treachery were to remain, would have seen the fall of heaven itself. If the innocent and the tricksters were allowed to stay, the landscape of heaven and all its purity and glory, all of what heaven stood for, would forever be changed. Heaven just wouldn't be heaven anymore if God chose to be lenient. God cannot change. He cannot and will not be mocked. A king rules in fairness and injustice, and protects all the people of heaven. God cannot allow darkness to prevail in his presence. He is the light, and in him there is no darkness. Adam and Eve were to leave heaven immediately. They were to never return until they personally met the requirements to regain entry. God would send Adam and Eve's descendants, their kin, their children, the tree of life, who was firmly devoted to heaven as his roots were planted in the will of God. This tree would be a seed planted in the womb of a woman in the time when Eve's children fell under Roman occupation. He would grow up to be a king, a leader, a teacher, and a source of comfort for all those who sought refuge under the shelter of his branches. Jesus would teach people the ways of heaven through his ministry, so that all who followed him could reclaim an inheritance that was freely given long ago. Jesus leads us back to heaven if we so choose. Our choice is never taken away from us. Some liken this treasure oasis to Shangri-La. Is it utopian? Well, it's not fictional, but definitely legendary. Hardly anyone remembers that it still exists today. That's because heaven is no longer on a physical plane. A separation took place when the Great Divide happened in heaven. This is also known as the fall. Heaven is a spiritual place. It belongs to every believer because heaven can be found in the heart of every believer. Heaven is a safe place, away from the riffraff of negative emotions and unwanted and disconcerting individuals that creep around us in the dark of the night. This place is called the Garden of God, as the book of Ezekiel mentions, and this is our heavenly destiny. And I will put enmity between you and the woman, and between your offspring and hers. Genesis chapter 3, verse 15. Enmity replaced God's will of everyone getting along. The enemy wanted to fight in heaven. Earth became that battleground, not heaven. Those that left their high positions in heaven were cast out, making earth their home. Now, can you see why the world is as it is? Can you see the spiritual disadvantage we are in? We are only at a spiritual disadvantage when we do not have Jesus. Narcissists strip us of this advantage through coercion, trickery, and deceit. We will discuss more about this later on, as the story will direct our attention to and point the finger at the narcissist. We must wear the armor of God daily. It is important to not rush into making alliances with people who seem kind, good, and holy. The stories about kings trusting the wrong people are lessons right from the Bible itself. Appearances are deceiving, as this is a familiar trait of the unholy. Enmity was cast out of heaven the moment it was put into action. The enemy's heart is sealed against humanity. No matter the amount of love we show, this will not change God's rule. The division makers were cast out of heaven, and now the earth's people live in that division. The great divide of heaven may not be in our memory, but the spirit of that memory lingers. We know who our opponents truly are. We just don't want to believe it, because our scope of knowledge is from the side of innocence through Adam and Eve. They loved God blindly, and they also loved their enemy blindly. When God sent us, the tree of life, to teach and guide us, He took off the scales off our eyes so that we could see. Woe to you, teachers of the law and the Pharisees, you hypocrites! So you testify against yourselves that you are the descendants of those who murdered the prophets. Go ahead and complete what your ancestors started. You snakes, you brood of vipers, how will you escape being condemned to hell? Matthew chapter 23, verse 29 through 33. You belong to your father, the devil, and you want to carry out your father's schemes. He was a murderer from the beginning, not holding to the truth, for there is no truth in him. When he speaks his native tongue, he is a liar, Adam and Eve were two people who represented the adopted sons and daughters of God. The spiritually fallen, while they represent the true-born. But they are no longer of the true-born nation of heaven, that spiritual line, because of what they did. They committed the unpardonable sin. Their transgression was not just citing a rebellion. They committed acts of treason, and they held treason in their hearts. Heaven was so unified that if an individual hated just one person, that person then hated all. The spiritual holy citizens of heaven who had retained their positions in heaven, they have stayed true to God, and now they help us today. They help us stay true to God. The rebellion was to usurp God's authority. The plan was to kick Adam and Eve out of heaven by causing their death. That's murder. One spiritual being stood in the way of Adam and Eve's happiness in that garden. And the enemy questioned the young girl in a way that maybe he didn't believe that they would really die. Or maybe he did. He knew. He knew exactly what he was doing. And Adam and Eve were not true sons and daughters of heaven. So he knew that this power couple would die when they disobeyed God. But when and how, well, that was another story. The enemy stepped forward and enticed Eve in such a way that barred her and her mate from heaven. Well, this much we do know. And I would like us to actually dig a little further into this nugget of information, as I would like to offer a question. Did the spiritual being who set Adam and Eve for the fall, did he think that they would be banned from heaven or barred? Interesting. He had no idea the mind of God, but he had never broken a rule. So no one had ever seen the wrath of God. So this was kind of a testing of God. The enemy had no idea that his trickery would set him up for consequence too. He had no idea the cost he had to pay for treachery and treason. Did he know treason was a lifelong sentence? Lifelong. Let's just take a moment to pause here, because the spiritual being existed outside the realms of time. Oopsie. Oh, this certainly sheds light that the enemy did make a mistake when he bartered his life for Adam and Eve's. They hate us with that same passion. The enemy was jealous of Adam and Eve, and that jealousy is still seething in the heart today of all who walk in the enemy's name. The hate of the enemy is something I have documented in length in a book I have written, The Blood Covenant of Elohim. Through the hidden language barrier between English and Hebrew, I share with you, the reader, why and how jealousy and such hatred exists against us today. From end-of-life pregnancies, transgender issues, transhumanism, human trafficking, and child brides, to the jab in the arm, fear porn about specific viruses, all of this can be traced back to the bloody war against God's covenant. This was a covenant, a promise he had with his chosen, as our blood is directly scrutinized and attacked because our blood is a part of this covenant. The enemy is hell-bent on our destruction. A link to this book is provided in the description and pinned in the comments of this video. To give you insight, as it is relevant for this video, Adam and Eve were placed in the garden and were ignorant or innocent, or we could even say naive, to the ways of the garden. God had to teach them. Like children, they too were taught by example. They saw what life was like in the garden of God and followed the ways of other people. They spent time with God and with other people. They had God's undivided attention that before Adam and Eve's arrival, the guardian cherub was used to. His jealousy would create in him such a division in his heart that the hatred formed would make him God's seemingly formidable enemy. Adam and Eve looked different. They acted different than the citizens of heaven. The guardian could not understand why God spent so much time with them. And when God wasn't around, the guardian was entrusted to care for them. That just didn't seem right or fair. Before Adam and Eve came along, heaven was so pure. There was no need for rules. Suddenly, with them around, there was only one rule for everyone. Do not touch the forbidden fruit. The angels were not to touch Adam and Eve, and Adam and Eve were not to touch angels. Angels were forbidden fruit to this couple, as this couple was forbidden fruit to the angels. What makes them so special? Thought the guardian. These rules separated Adam and Eve from everyone else. No one saw Adam and Eve complain about it. The only ones to complain were the guardian and a third of the angelic hosts. They grumbled amongst themselves. To bring back the status quo, heaven's new and only power couple had to leave. This rule that God spoke into existence that everybody had to adhere by, well, this had to be broken. The guardian was so hurt, so angry, that he was going to show God his ruling authority was wrong. He would show God, as the enemy questioned in his heart, God's ability to rule over heaven. Rules literally were for the dirt-bound. Because Adam and Eve were not born of heaven, the punishment for their disobedience was to go back to their homeland. Out you go. They were naturally deported. The enemy was extradited. He was extradited because he acted outside of heaven's citizenry. He acted like an outsider, and he got treated as an outsider. He was now subject to the rules of earth. Now, God is not cruel that he should leave humans destitute because they were innocent in their transgression. So God imprinted on every man and woman and child a longing for heaven. And this isn't spoken about in the Bible, but this is using biblical license because you know your heart itself has that pull and longing to go back to God. We have these spiritual residual pangs left over from a time when Adam and Eve lived there. The desire to go back is deeply rooted in our DNA. We have been given access to hold on to this memory in its distant form, as this helps draw us back closer to God. Adam and Eve's home was naturally earth, and they got to spend time in heaven. So naturally, it makes sense that we don't have a natural remembrance of heaven. Now, I think God has allowed us to long for heaven, as this longing gives us direct access to Jesus. Now, this might be why some of us long so desperately as we become homesick for God. I know I am. But what about those spiritual beings who left heaven on purpose through their diabolical acts? Did they have a longing? Yes, they do. But their longing is different, as they remember heaven differently. Each and every opposing force of heaven that has been guilty of insurrection, they were stripped of their titles through and through. They were demoted with dishonorable discharge. Out you go. They were made to live as they were nothing, even though in heaven they were somebody. They abdicated their heavenly worth and value. Now, this is on them. But because they are spiritual and because of where they came from, their memory and their longing is lifelong. Their remembrance of heaven is intact. They remember heaven. They have a longing to go back. Now, this is their lifelong punishment. They have a lifelong memory of the life that they threw away. The memory of heaven was seared into them like a tattoo right from the day that they were created. They know. They have a deep-seated knowing of heaven, and they can't forget this knowing. And this knowing is what motivates them in all they do. They have a spiritual scar of guilt and shame etched into their souls that burns in their hearts. And they stood before the glory of God. They can never stand before the glory of God again, and they can never be in unity with Him again. Think of how numbing that is. This leaves a bitter root that nothing in heaven or on earth can dig out. So do you not think the enemy is not envious that we get to stand before God one day and feel such love and peace and protection and wholeness? We can go to the throne room of God just through prayer alone. Do you not think the enemy is trying to thwart us at every chance they can get to prevent us from living the life that they once lived? Oh yeah, you better believe it. Come hell or high water, we're going to be stopped. And Adam and Eve had no idea the enemy was out for blood. Now, he's not just out for our blood, he's out for our soul. The enemy can never return home. He has memories of home that fuel his growing regret, that fuels his growing hate for humanity. This hate caused him to devise a diabolical plan, a plan that lingers in the minds and hearts of his own children. For every good and perfect thing God has done, the enemy has a counterfeit. Think in terms of God's one and only perfect sacrifice, Jesus. The enemy has a multitude of imperfect sacrifices that are also blood related. The world was sent a tree to help redeem mankind of their sins. It was through the tree of knowledge that these sins manifest. The tree of knowledge corrupted Adam and Eve, and it is through the children of the tree of knowledge who become a living sacrifice, not to redeem man of their sins, but to be a sacrifice in attempts to redeem the cherub, the guardian, as his sin is what led to his downfall. The enemy intends to undo the sacrifice of God by invalidating it. He does this by the many attempts to corrupt the blood. The spirit of the enemy is alive and well in the heart and mind of every single narcissist. Now, to be fair, there are people who have narcissistic traits, and there are those who are separated from that, who have the narcissistic personality disorder. The latter is a character that is sealed and seared and solid in stone, as the heart of the narcissistic personality disorder type of person is stone cold dead. They are dead set against love. I know this sounds cruel and heartless to call a narcissist unsavory and unsavable, but that's the truth. How can a narcissist be saved by love if they don't even recognize it, as they are permanently set against it? They can't recognize love. Oh, they can recognize love, all right. The love God has for Adam and Eve was attacked in the garden, causing division in heaven. The enemy knows love because he once felt it, and he can spot it right away in those who love unconditionally. When we love the narcissist, we remind the narcissist of that heavenly love, and that rubs them raw. They hate that we love so perfectly. They try to undo this seal in our hearts by trying to get us to turn on ourselves. Because the narcissist knows we do not yet unconditionally love ourselves. And what better way to seal our fate against ourselves is that the narcissist projects their character onto us, as this confuses us and causes us to question not the narcissist, but our love for them, because our love for them is unconditional. But the love that we have for ourselves is not there yet. We question our love that we have for ourselves by doubting ourselves. And this is exactly what the narcissist wants, as this is how the narcissist puts us on that chopping block. The narcissist wants to turn us into them. They want us to switch roles. They want us to give all our unconditional love to them so that we won't have anything left for ourselves. That's some twisted mister of a bee sting right there, isn't it? But what does the enemy have to lose? It's not like they're getting back into heaven, right? 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 Well, I've heard pastors say that even if Hitler turned his heart to God and asked for forgiveness, God would forgive him. Well, that sounds good on paper, but a man like Hitler is a man like the enemy, as Hitler would never, ever, ever turn his heart towards repentance. It's impossible. Hitler committed the unpardonable sin, so there's no going back from that, as the Bible states. The minute Hitler turned his heart over to murder, that was it. He sealed his own fate. Hitler didn't just murder one time, and this wasn't oopsie, an accident. He didn't commit murder and regret it. He committed evil and relished in it because he was of his father, the devil. Hitler was an antichrist. Hitler was bloodthirsty. He was thirsty for blood, and he had a bloodlust that was like hellfire burning him deep into his core. He killed multitudes and trained men and women and children to kill multitudes in his name. So there's no forgiveness for that. Only God's holy and righteous judgment, and that is what the enemy has come into him. Hitler did to humanity what the enemy initiated with Adam and Eve in the garden and has done all throughout civilization. So do not weep for the narcissist. Do not weep for the enemy's children. Do not weep for the enemy who loved God at one time and was his beloved. He forsook God, and this story shows us what happens to us when we forsake God. There's a difference between rebelling from God and turning away from God completely. Now, this story shows us that we should not succumb to our enemy, and yet we almost do when we're faced with the narcissist. And we are not supposed to bow down to them and give up the good fight. So keep going. Just because we are cursed to fight with the enemy's children, we don't have to give them a fight like they want to fight. We fight against our enemy with love by loving ourselves. By embracing the brokenhearted, the victimized, we can love those who have been cast aside. By dressing the wounds of the weak, the narcissist leaves for dead, spiritually dead. By helping our fallen soldiers, we help ourselves as we learn to grow and lean on Jesus, the love of Jesus, that unconditional love and unconditional favor, as our hope and trust is found in him. By being kind to ourselves and each other, and being kind to our enemy is what it means to stand up against them. Being kind to our enemy means that we look at their situation, we understand their pain. It doesn't mean that we fight them in their pain. We don't give the enemy what they're looking for. This is what it means to resist the enemy. By understanding who your enemy is, how they act, you can then better address their behavior and see where it's coming from, that's understanding is love. And you then stand your ground in that love to understand them. And the love that you have for yourself is equal to that love you have for the narcissism in that understanding, because you apply that understanding to yourself and you learn to forgive yourself. In forgiving your enemy, you forgive yourself. And this is what makes you guys equal, even though you are not. Remember, there is no favoritism in heaven, and we are to bring down heaven on earth by radiating the love of Jesus Christ to everyone. Everyone gets your best of yourself, including you. The best of your love is given to everyone, and no one experiences the least of you. You bring honor to yourself and all of us when you allow yourself to love in healing. When you learn how to approach the ravenous wolf on the battlefield of life, you help educate us as well as we learn from you. The enemy wants to kill multiple birds with one stone. His master plan is to teach God and his people a lesson: never mess with the best. The enemy is using the likeness of his children to lead and guide them into winning our hearts. There is a competition clause within narcissism. It's not about who wins on earth, but who wins on earth to make it back to heaven first. The enemy wants to go home. We want to go home too. But the motivations between us and the enemy's seed, well, those are different. The false self the narcissist tries to hide from is rooted in the guilt and shame, remorse and regret of their father. This was spiritually handed down through spiritual genetics. The enemy has an eternal knowing of what heaven is like. He has imparted that to his children, an eternal knowing of God, and when something hurts so much, we disassociate ourselves from that pain. To gain entry into heaven, God needed a blood sacrifice. The enemy has shoved Jesus aside and convinced humanity that we do not need to accept this one true sacrifice. We can sacrifice ourselves, according to the enemy. We can become living martyrs in the name of love and acceptance. The narcissist has cruel intentions. As the narcissist, the enemy's seed pushes their enmity for us aside to act out a diabolical and sinister plan. Can you see the characteristics of narcissism as they are rooted in the heart of the enemy? Now, the enemy, just think about this, was not raised with rules. If there was no bad thing in heaven, then no one had to adhere to any rules to keep them in line from preventing them from doing anything bad. There were no rules in heaven to keep anyone adherent to the ways of God because everybody followed God. Makes sense, right? Psychologists tells us that narcissistic personality disorder is formed from parents who are lax in rules or who are too rigid in rules, as either or stunts the child from discovering their own identity in their personal autonomy. So when you give this some thought, everyone in heaven was to act as one, as everyone had the same heart and mind as everyone else, as their hearts and minds were rooted in the mind and heart of God. So giving this deeper thought, the enemy, who was a child of God, who was at one time highly favored by God, thought and acted like God. This guardian in the garden did not have to learn to respect his Father in heaven because heaven had no rules. There was just an expectation to live as instructed, and the citizens of heaven did that until something new was introduced. Adam and Eve was that something new, as their presence in the garden introduced a new rule. One rule. Now, some people may have been excited for that change in heaven, while others were not. Before Adam and Eve, everyone got along. There was no need for rules. The enemy saw differentiation within the likenesses of Adam and Eve. He saw that they were different, and he wanted that for himself. He wanted to be different. Well, he was, but he couldn't see his difference in a positive way from Adam and Eve's perspective. He wanted to be the only one who was different. He wanted to be the one set apart. Well, he was, but he couldn't see that from his perspective. Envy is so short-sighted, my friends. The narcissistic ways of humanity is the mark of the enemy. I believe all the answers and the information in this video shares with you the real hidden reason why narcissists are hell-bent on control. And it has everything to do with us being different from them. It also has everything to do with what happened in the garden long ago. It has everything to do with the curse. The things of the spirit cannot die. They pass on through generation to generation. This is seen in the scientific genre called epigenetics. Now, these spiritual accentuations may be watered down through genetics, but they are still present within our blood. The memory of our past, our spiritual past, is rooted deep down within us, and it can't be destroyed. The enemy blames Adam and Eve for his own demise, so that's the curse. We have to accept this fact. Now, just think about this. The enemy tried to murder Adam and Eve. He tricked them out of their own inheritance. This inheritance was available to them if they so choose to become adopted sons and daughters of the adopted son and daughter of God. The enemy was jealous of Adam and Eve attaining this free gift of eternal life and the blessings that go along with it. Once he committed this crime, there was no going back. He may have questioned himself. He may have done what Judas did. Oh no, what have I done? I've put to death the innocent. Judas committed the unpardonable sin by denying Jesus is God, is Lord, is King of Kings. Now the guardian angel, who wasn't of the earth but was likened to an earthly animal, a snake, and this is only because of his shrewdness, this garden enemy cannot die by his own hand. He's got to sit with that inner guilt lifelong. And when he sits with that guilt, it percolates and it turns into shame, which then festers and smolders into burning hate and desire to rid the earth of all of us. His guilt and shame is permanent. It's seared into his soul. The feelings of revenge, jealousy, fear, loathing, abhorrence is rooted in the very heart of every narcissist. You can truly see that they come by their father's love, honestly. Would you not agree? The enemy wants to kill, steal, and destroy. He is hell-bent on destroying us, not first without trying to possess us in such a way in attempts to trade places with us. I am sure this sounds far-fetched, but is this any more far-fetched of the stories of the Anunnaki that some believe? What about new scientific information about mud fossils and Tartaria? Any more far-fetched about undoing the likeness of mankind through gender-bending augmentation and technology? Is this any more far-fetched than to believe a man when he says he is spiritually like that of a woman, irregardless that he is physically in the likeness of a man? Any more far-fetched than placing human consciousness onto a computer chip? The enemy is desperate, trying to get us to forfeit our inheritance by presenting us with wonders that are astounding and awe-inspiring. This video questions to what is the real purpose? What is the real agenda? Anyone ever watched the movie Freaky Friday? Don't tell me that the enemy doesn't think it can't be done. The enemy has many schemes and is doing his best to undo the curse that befell him. Not you, but him. He has gone above it, below it, around it, and now he's going through it. He's causing a misrepresentation of facts that are directed at the spirit in the blood. The enemy preys upon the weak, the young, the old, the ill, the naive, the forgiving, the strong, the unconditional loving. No one is immune. No one, not even the enemy's children themselves. The enemy will feed on his own kin, as so they will also feed on those who serve Jesus. We, my friends, are flanked in at all sides, so it seems, as the earth is the enemy's battlefield disguised as a playground. Our battle in this video has been to understand what is at the heart of narcissism, what gives narcissists their meaning, and what is their real agenda. Well, we're almost at the end of this video, and I am hopeful you will be left with some things to think about, as I hope you will use this information wisely. Guard your hearts to protect yourself so you don't have to live another minute of being tethered to the narcissist and the trauma bonding. You will find your way back to love again as soon as you cut that tether. It's just going to take some time in healing. So it's time that we make our stand for our one true love, because we have always been ready. We just have been deceived into believing that we're not worthy. There's a difference. The plan is to have a relationship with you. That's the narcissist goal. They want a romantic or platonic relationship with you. It doesn't matter. The relationship leads you to believe that the narcissist or the other person is genuine in their feelings towards you. Now, you being genuine yourself, you're none the wiser. You believe you are mutually loving and you're in a mutually beneficial relationship. You don't know that you're being tricked. You don't know that you're tricked into giving away your love. You give your love to someone who returns to you your love all trampled on. You naturally feel spiritually loyal to people, either through your blood bond because they're family, or the connection that you have with them romantic or platonically. The thing is, you don't understand that you're giving your pearl to swine. You don't see the wolf in sheep's clothing, as the pearl that you give to them freely is trampled on and then swallowed up by the wolf and vomits it out to you. And the Bible does say after the discard, the wolf always returns to its vomit. You don't notice the real purpose in all of this. You are drowning in the trauma bond, as the trauma bond keeps your mind's attention focused on the pain and not focused on the healing and what is going on around you. It's the look here, not there kind of syndrome. As the trauma bond keeps your focus on what is hurting your heart, that you can't see exactly who and why. You can't see the motives behind who is hurting your heart. As the trauma bond is meant to get you to forget about your first love, that innate nature, that calling for home, the one who you are truly spiritually bonded to. Because you think your identity is in the narcissist, you cleave to them, as you are left in a state of spiritual shock. The narcissist most often becomes our end all, be all. When you are finally discarded, or scapegoated even, you are left with your own wounds. You trauma dump onto others, and you end up trauma dumping onto yourself, trying to satisfy the pain in your ego. And this is where vultures gather and those flying monkeys. They say, why don't you just forget about them? You're talking about this too much. Frankly, I don't know why you stayed, says one vulture to another. But you try not to listen, but your guilt and shame won't let you. You are so desperate for the narcissist to come back. You don't see the spiritual dynamics at work and at play here. The narcissist stripped you of the love you thought you had forgotten, but it was hijacked as your crown jewels were stolen. See, the narcissist entered your home, God's temple. By the open door, you invited them into your hearts and minds, and you allowed them into your rooms. You gave them full access to your heart and mind, to which they cut up and made a mess of things, spilling their own baggage about, and they left to have you clean it up. That's the way they are. And their intention was to replace your King of Heaven, who resides in here, with the King of the earth. That's the bottom line, but it doesn't work. The narcissist expects to control you fully and completely, but they don't gain full control and access because of the one who lives in your heart. Because they can't oust Jesus out of your heart, they can't kick Jesus out of your temple, the narcissist has to leave, and they don't simply walk away. They will give you a fight. They will give you that lasting impression of who they are to scar you for life. It's equivalent to when Jesus says to the demon in this man, who says, we know who you are, Jesus. You're the Son of God. Please don't hurt us. And Jesus says, be quiet. Come up out of him. And the demon left with a shriek. But not just a shriek. The man was thrown down on the ground. Why is that? Because there was people watching, and this demon needed an audience to, I'm going to show them. They're going to fear me. Okay, I got to leave because Jesus is authority, but I'm not leaving quietly. I'm going to show these people. They will fear me when I come knocking on their door. This is a familiar trait of the enemy. The narcissist will always leave you, but they will always find someone they think is weaker than you. Now, the narcissist doesn't intend to leave, but they can't stay. When they cannot control you, there's nothing left for them to do. The spiritual agenda is just like the one in the book of Job, as the enemy wanted to take Job down. And he did, but Job would not surrender his heart, his soul to the enemy, and neither will you. And that's why the narcissist has to flee as they do. The enemy wants to be God and sets himself up to be godlike on earth. He rules with an iron fist, scaring us all half to death. By trading places with us in spirit, the enemy is attempting. Attempting doesn't not mean that he will succeed, but the enemy is attempting to save himself when Jesus comes back. He wants heaven for himself. Let me ask you, have you ever been in a position where you would stop at nothing to get what you wanted? And the reason why you didn't was because your morals held you back? The enemy and his children have no morals to hold them back. They are amoral. Our morality and ethics are heavenly. Trickery to gain an inheritance is nothing new. Jacob tricked Esau. Look at how he did it. He claimed Esau's inheritance by trading his likeness for the likeness of his brother, who was hairy. Jacob tricked Esau by bartering his inheritance away, trading something of long-term value for something that was short-term in value. And this is why the trauma bond hurts so much. We make a trade. We trade our unconditional love for conditional love. This is a long-term value for a short-term value. The deception between the families is apparent. We act like adopted kin on earth as we live God's rules to love everyone on earth, including the enemy. We disavow the curse. We try to ignore it. And because we ignore it, this doesn't make the curse go away. It's a consequence that we get hurt because we ignore the curse. Our guarantee is that when we live for God through Jesus, we are guaranteed our inheritance in heaven. But we can't understand why the narcissist hurts us so much. It's nothing personal, yet it is. The trauma bond has us engaging with symptoms that bring about negative feelings that stand against who we truly are. Now we know through this video who narcissists are. Are we really going to take their abuse and believe their word over God's anymore? Oh, hell no. As much as the narcissist leads us wrongly, we end up finding our way home again. We lose our identity to discover who we are, as our identity is rooted in Jesus. We are God's chosen, and we can't lose our inheritance, my friends. It's impossible, because we love like Jesus. Losing the narcissist helps us to see that we truly do. We love the narcissist unconditionally, and when they leave us, we learn to love ourselves unconditionally. That's the way to loving Jesus. We learn how to love ourselves when the narcissist discards us. And in loving ourselves, we find our hope in Jesus. We find our true love. Isn't that amazing? The trauma bond, this is so strong, and it is difficult to let the narcissist go because we only assume that they are like us. They are not like us. They are dark and twisted and are not human. If someone can claim that they feel like they are a woman living inside a man's body, this is something that they try to correct physically. If this is happening now in the world today, is this information that I'm sharing with you, is this any stretch of the imagination to suggest that the enemy attempts to trade your likeness for theirs? The narcissist tries to project their likeness onto us by trying to force us to feel like they feel, to which your thoughts and your actions create your character. So they're trying to force us to become like them, to which then we lose our identity in ourselves. But the narcissist doesn't know that we have Christ, because you can't see what you don't know. So there's a supernatural dynamic here that when the narcissist has their comeuppance, they have to bow down to God as they spiritually see but don't recognize that it's God, but they fear it, and so they got to leave. The narcissist tries to get us to give up ourselves so that they can harvest our likeness and impart it into them, and voila, God will see the goodness in them and they'll be saved. No, it doesn't work like that. Our identity is identifiable in Jesus. He and me, he and you are one, which makes you and I one. How we recover from the narcissistic trauma is to search out that oneness, to search for Jesus inside of ourselves, as our identity is always found in him. We are rooted in him. We are one with him. The narcissist is the one that stands alone. The narcissist cannot get their inheritance back no matter how hard they try. They cannot embody who we are because our identity is not our own. We're not separate from God. The narcissist discards us because we've become too much work. Well, that's what they think. But it's not because we're too much work. It's because we cannot be fully, completely controlled by them because of who we are. Now, there is a silver lining to all of this. When we are discarded and we have to deal with the symptoms of the trauma bond, we learn that our identity was lost. Well, we lose our identity. We lose the knowledge of our identity so that we can be found in Christ Jesus. As we find ourselves in Him, what a beautiful thing this is, to truly rise up out of the ashes, don't you think? So now, with the hidden mystery revealed, can you see where the narcissist is actually hell-bent on controlling you? Does this information make it easier for you to let go and allow yourself to heal from the narcissistic trauma? It is my hope that in this video, this has been a source of illumination for you. It has for me, and I'm so excited for all of us because this video is a freaking game changer. You don't have to feel rejected and abandoned. You don't have to feel the guilt and shame. That's for them to feel. You don't have to feel like your love was never enough. It is. It always has been. You were conned into loving someone who doesn't give a damn about anyone but themselves. You were conned and tricked into loving someone who can never love you. But you can now give yourself permission to let go of the fear, because that fear goes back to the narcissist, because that's from them. Because you now know who you are, and you now can live in love. You are a son or daughter of Jesus. If you didn't know that, then you do now. Your freedom is a bright light, as your life was bought with the blood of Christ. The enemy has tricked you out of believing this covenant with you for his own gain. The enemy tried to kill your soul, but he can't. He tried to stomp on the power of God within you. How dare he? How dare they? And there's hell to pay for that, but that's not your concern, because revenge is not for yours to give. That is for God's perfect and good will, that he seeks revenge on those whom he seeks revenge on. You are the apple of God's eye, and the fury of God's wrath will come down on them who tried to hurt you. So use this time wisely before Jesus comes back to heal yourself and set yourself up on God's word. I guarantee you that once you discover your faith in yourself, as you rediscover your faith and love for Jesus, you are the force to be reckoned with. You will be the one who sets this world ablaze with love for your fellow man, and you will have dignity tucked under your belt and expose the enemy, and not let any of your brothers or sisters in the Lord to fall to the lambs like slaughter ever again. This is heavy stuff right here. And it may not be easy to hear, but the truth will set you free. So just use this information wisely. Yeah? I understand that the narcissist is someone who claims to be your friend, but they are not your friend. They do not love you and can never love you. And as much as all these videos and everyone who has good intentions towards you, we all are speaking the same tune. The narcissist cannot love because they don't have empathy. I am hopeful that this video gives you some foundation to stand on that belief. The enemy has tried to force your hand by tricking your heart into believing that you are not worthy of heaven. Although narcissism is not mentioned in the Bible, the characteristics are seen in the insurrectionists of those who left their high place of heaven just to kick two people out of it. Two innocent people who had no malicious intent whatsoever. Now, It is common to trace historical meaning of narcissism to Grecian mythology, but mythology can't share with us the mystery of why the narcissist exists and to what extent narcissism flourishes today. Narcissism cannot be healed by mankind, but it can be stopped by God Himself. And we can keep others safe as we keep ourselves safe through discernment, as this video does just that. Yeah, it's my greatest hope, my brothers and sisters, that you stay safe, strong, and protected in Jesus' name. Blessings.